There she is. Red with the transistor.
Oh,
And
yeah.
there are whole worlds within that thing. I
I gotta
guess
bump it. Oh, yeah.
it's just the best.
It's so good.
Hey, Rye.
Hey, here
Good
we
to see
are.
you. Here we are. Cheers. Welcome to Videogame Sommelier. Tonight, we are one video short,
We
right?
are.
Our good friend James Roth. We usually call him Jimmy, but
Esquire.
James Roth Esquire. Could not be with us. You are
Honorary.
both in Texas, where it is so cold right now. I here in Southern California, at night it dips down into the 50s, and I,
Oh.
put on my second layer of socks. No, but you guys are dealing with some serious weather and
It is. It's the snowpocalypse.
snowpocalypse.
Yeah, we got down to 0 degrees, which
That's far too
it's
few
as
degrees.
low as the thermometer goes.
um, that is so cool.
Yep.
I
And we've
I
been having
lived.
rotating power outages, and
Oh,
today even the water stopped showing up at some people's houses. It was a big deal. Yeah, big
well,
problems.
I'm glad that things are going smoothly, mostly on your end, and Jimmy's
Here I
safe
am.
and fine. But it's just some other things to take care of and worry about right now. I
Yeah.
was gonna say I lived in Minnesota, and all that I wanted to point out from that was that it's in the past tense. I moved away from there because I
Goodbye.
am just not built for the cold.
You moved
And
back to California.
I moved back to California, and I remember when I was in undergrad, just reminding my parents, like the state borders are open. You don't need a passport or anything. You can just leave. That no one will ask any questions. You can just get out of there.
Get
Uh,
over here.
yeah,
Yeah,
but
well, if I
alas,
randomly drop out, it's because I lost power. So here
right.
we go.
And then I will figure out what I'm gonna do
Exactly.
with a solo stream.
Throw a
Um,
hasty conclusion on this.
Yeah, exactly. So my thought is, so yeah, so it's just the two of us. Jimmy will be back with us next time when
Yep.
we begin talking about our March game that we'll
Mm,
announce a little bit later in the stream. But Rye,
mm.
I finished the game, which I had not during our
Good.
first conversation.
We were holding our
Um,
tongue.
exactly, yeah, and so I feel like this is a game that we should have that I wish I had finished for our first conversation because yeah, like you play through half the runtime of the game and you're halfway through the game, but so much of the content comes in that second half.
I
Um,
know, right?
so I feel very excited that we can talk about it now. Um, I kind of wanted to explore if you went into the transistor, what you think you would do for the sword. Um, we have another song with lyrics that you want to talk about.
hmm
Um, and then we're
I
just
need
gonna
to ask, what is the country?
right,
Oh man, that's the question I want to really get into in this podcast.
great. Um, yeah, because it looks quintessential middle of America country. Like there's a barn, there's
Oh,
wheat,
I know. Yeah.
um, clear blue skies. But
No
yeah,
technology, right?
right. But what does that mean? And who's there and why are they there? And yeah.
We
Um,
talked a lot in the first podcast about how Transistor as a game from Supergiant is a bit of a transitional game for them from their first blowout title to like finding their voice as a developer and their particular style and what they're good at, and probably honing the whole process of making a game because it's just so frenetic at the beginning. You try a bunch of stuff and then when it works you have to go back and ask, why did that work, and
right.
what would work if we ever tried to do it again for a second game. But you're a software developer, so you go back into it and figure it out. And I feel like Transistor kind of is a failed game.
Okay.
Like I guess that's just my conclusion on playing it again. It's not as polished as their other games. It's got a lot of ideas, and I think they allowed their different members of their development team to try stuff and do stuff, and they bolted it all together, and it's a really compelling, interesting game, but not one I would say like
Yeah, it is
eventually
interesting.
coheres in the best way.
Yeah, it has a lot of elements and it goes a lot of different places. Um, I was watching a couple of um, recap videos as kind of preparation for this, just to hear what some other people have been thinking about and talking about. And it's really interesting that it's like, hey, there are like three theories on three major theories on what the country is, and hey, there's tons of theories on what the transistor is, and there's like five theories on what Cloudbank is. And so it's interesting that they created so much conversation, but it's
Mm-hmm.
frustrating for someone that likes finding the narrative thread and the meaning of it all, to not totally know what they meant, and so
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
but I love how much you love that production company, and we're not going to be playing another Supergiants game next month, but we had talked about like, hey, should we just go through the rest of the Supergiants games
Right.
just because they're worth it? So I also anticipate another game or two will find its way onto your list by the end of as we continue on with this. Um, but yeah,
I learned
we
as an
lost you for a
author.
second,
Oh
and
yeah,
so I think that's why I was talking over you for a second. But
that's okay.
you're back in
I
full form.
I am. I learned as an author that I had to solve some of the speculations of my readers so that I could let them speculate about the things I wanted them to speculate about. and
Mm,
and I think Supergiant hadn't figured this out at the time of Transistor, but they
yeah.
have now when they do Hades. So Hades is
Okay.
their latest game, and all of the speculation that goes into Hades is about the relationships between each of the characters. You're asking
Ooh.
questions about their past history together, the way they feel about each other, what they're saying or not saying, their subtext, and they really shine when they get into that. In Transistor, I think that they left too many questions open about the world, such that you're not allowed to speculate enough about the characters. And the most interesting relationship, the one between Red and this man, this unknown man, um, is really in center focus, but it's not allowed much space to breathe, to really think about, because you're too busy trying to understand, are these real people or digital people? And does it make a difference? And
Yeah.
what is the process? And why is that weird, creepy guy in the Camerata continue to monologue to me? What is his goals? Where did they go when she put the transistor in the cradle? They went into the
Right, with all
transistor,
the
but
more transistors in the background.
yeah, exactly. It's like a mood board of a game, and not the actual game.
But I think you're right because I didn't spend much time thinking about Red and the Mr. Nobody or whatever he's called in that file, because that felt like the one thing I knew was fine. Like they have a good relationship and, they have a lot of affection for each other and they're looking out for each other. So that felt like constant. And then it was everything else. Like, are they alive? Are they all just programs? Is this like Tron? Or then there's like the or not the remake, but the sequel to Tron, where there is a real person in a program world. So like, are they real people? What's going on?
Right.
That was a good distinction about solving some of the ambiguity so that we can discuss things that are worth talking about, and that will really have a meaning for the player and the gaming experience. But yeah.
Right. So it kind of cuts off our conversation at the knees a little bit because
Mm,
we can't get definite answers, and our speculation then means that any like speculation that builds on top of that, only feels half as powerful.
right.
Right.
I do like that you had the intuition of going to song lyrics because that is objective content that's in the game that we can still speculate about the meaning and the emotion, but it is information that we're actually given about here are the lyrics, here are the words that they put to this.
Yeah.
Um, but since I'm still thinking about it, I want to share just kind of my experience of playing the ending of the game, and
Hmm.
then I'd love to hear your thoughts. Having played it a couple times
Right.
and over the last few years, I texted you and Jimmy when I was done, just with the last two words of the game, and then like a crying face. I am a pretty low bar when it comes to experiencing emotion in content, whether that's video games or movies or TV shows or the very well written commercial. Um, but this game made me, genuinely emotional at the end.
Mm,
It's a real ending and beginning. So when you defeat the final member of the Camarada, you are given complete control over everything in the world. You can kind of recreate Cloudbank more or less in your own image, like however you would like. It's no longer a crowdsourced opinion of what color should the sunset be,
right.
what should the weather be like. Now it's just what do you red want, and you can make it happen. And so she demonstrates that power, by creating some statues and some little spaces, but then goes and recreates the body that we start the game with. And then this is one of the questions that you kind of have to wonder about. Seemingly, she kills herself after that.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's some, questions of like, is that suicide, or was that her just removing herself from this fake world and now she's gonna, kind of live in reality, or did she, die and go to live in the transistor? There are a lot of
Right.
questions about that,
Is this
but
like waking up in the Matrix?
exactly, did she take the pill, right? And then, now she's in the real world. Um, or was it more like Romeo and Juliet, where it's just her lover is dead
I
and
never
she's
even thought of that, but you're right.
yeah. Um so I walked away, a little conflicted because I think suicide is such a tragic
Yeah.
choice.
That part of
Um
the game I don't think is aged very well.
hmm
Yeah.
uh but then like this it really does have a different feel than I think real world, because it
Hmm.
wasn't a sense of she's depressed or escaping. She was doing this with the knowledge of where she was going, right? She was going to go be with her guy in the country. And we can talk more about what the country is and all of that, but it'll all
Yeah.
be guessing. So it felt really crummy to me at first, but then it felt lighter knowing that this is a different world. This isn't just Earth. This isn't just a singer committing suicide. This is something about in this world that is controlled by machines. She seems to be now the only person left. And given that choice of like, would you want to stay in a computer simulation that you have complete control? So it's kind of like the opposite of the Truman Show almost. Like
Mm,
you're in a simulation and you're in control,
hmm.
but you're completely alone. She has the voice of her guy and the consciousness of her guy, but she has no hand to hold. She has no one
Yeah.
to stroll around with, and there's no other opinion that matters. She's in complete control. So if it's just a simulation and she removed herself from it, I totally get that. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of the approach that I took. But yeah, just hearing her say "hey" to him at the end of the game was the best because she hasn't had her voice the entire time. So just having
Right.
her simply greet him in her voice, so they're together physically in some way, and she can speak and continue their relationship in a more traditional sense. As traditional as this game can be, not knowing
Right.
where in the world they are and all of that. Um, I was very moved by the end of the game.
Mm,
And they have the swelling music going, and then there were the still images of them together that I assume is the past of their relationship.
right.
But then it presents with a future, that there will be a future for them. So yeah, I really
Yeah.
just enjoyed the end of the game.
Mm,
And then going a step back further than that, I really enjoyed fighting the final boss who also had like the turn ability. So time would freeze on me and he'd attack me. That was horrifying and really off-putting, but really, really fun. So
it was a good like inversion of that mechanic. You've always
yep.
had that up on your enemies, and now they got it up on you, and you're like, wait, what are
And
the rules now?
yeah, and so one of my favorite combinations had the um running ability, the vault, or
Mm-hmm.
in as a subordinate, so that you could use it at any time. You didn't have to use this attack
Right.
during turn. So one of my go-to plans was just turn, hit them like crazy. But then even when I'm recharging my turn ability, I can still attack. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was even taken away from me because he still freezes me. So it's just it was
Right.
a very strange experience, but I really enjoyed that. But yeah, so how many times have you played this game, and what was it like replaying it this
Yeah.
time in preparation for this?
So I've probably played it through 5 times. That's my
Okay.
guess. And I played through the recursion mode. Like one of those files was done 3 times in a row, so it's recursion 3 times. And
Okay.
actually, I played it through a couple times. I let it sit for what 4 or 5 years, and then came back to it for this podcast. And then after playing through the game on a new save file, I then went back to that old recursion one and I played it through in that mode where all the enemies are souped up, but you've got all your
Everything.
abilities. Yeah, I reached the max user level, and at that rate, you have not only all 20 abilities, but you have a copy of all 20 abilities. And that's like a huge addition to the game because it means you can use subordinate abilities on itself. So it's really wild. Like it amplifies the abilities, makes you even more powerful, and it's really fun that they included that.
Yeah, I haven't been able to play with those yet. So I purchased my first duplicate,
Mm-hmm.
but then just haven't been able to get far into the recursion. Um, how far did you get? Have you beat all of the tests in that back door area?
I had like 5 years ago.
Okay.
I was
Yeah.
like glad it was all done.
Yes. The
Some of
timing
them are
ones.
really slow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The ones where you have to
Survive
accomplish
the
it in a
waves.
time limit have been the
Oh,
most
the time limits.
challenging for me.
Yeah.
I like the strategic ones or the survive. It's like
Right.
just live for 2 minutes, go.
Right.
I like those ones, but when it's like, hey, do this in this amount of time, it still is a challenge for me. But
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, I interrupted.
Well,
What?
they function as tutorials, to the
Yeah.
game. Like the game's missing, like tutorial, and they help you understand all of the systems underneath the game, which you might be tempted to stick with one strategy. And if anything, the game just suffers from like again a lack of development, even in its core gameplay. I
Mhm.
like I like Jimmy's thoughts last time about how it was fun to like noodle on the puzzle of, you know, combining those abilities and figuring out good combinations, because you really felt it when you had a bad combination.
Yeah.
And then when you had a good one, it was like really fun. And so the game like helps you in that backdoor area to discover some possible other combinations and other ways of playing. But they're all kind of gravy, right? They don't really connect to the story in any way, and
Right.
they're just for having fun, you know, twirling around with the systems.
Yeah, the only time I really used those strategically was just when I was close to leveling up. I'd go beat a couple rooms just so that I could get the
Yeah,
next thing.
right.
Um, but yeah, that was it. Yeah, and then
So,
go play with the dog to relax a little bit, throw the
right.
ball around.
Throw the ball around, hear a little bit of narration. And I mean, Supergiant, I think, realized the parts of the story and really their formula that really worked through this game. And so the fact that like narration continues to be a main part of their games going forward
Mm,
is because like Transistor helped them discover that this was their voice. This was what
yeah,
really worked. So I want to talk about the lead in to that conclusion with what's his name, Royce Brackett, right?
great.
You reach the spot where the game began, and you've discovered that the other two camerata, you know, have died, and I think they committed suicide.
It
A lot of
seemed like
suicide.
they did. Yeah,
Yeah. You also discover at that point that they were experimenting with the process. They have like the process in test tubes. And then this really weird thing happens where you summon a cloud of these things and you like write it.
right. Instead of riding the bike or the boat, you just do
Yeah.
that. Like,
And
I
it's
think
at
it
that
just demonstrates the power of the transistor, right, over
exactly.
the environment.
And your progress as the leading character in like wielding that power,
Yes.
and your confidence in it too. So she rides the process all the way back, and then you discover that you're able to build a bridge over to the inaccessible land where this final survivor is. And really, you're reading at the same time little quips about the people basically taking a last stand as the world is falling apart around them, as the
Mm,
process is coming in to consume them. And it's like
mm.
very bleak and awful.
And then you are sometimes upside down and teleporting sideways. It kind of becomes an MC Escher
Yeah.
sort of an experience. So it's all very surreal and final, and yeah, that's an intense buildup.
Royce introduces himself through like a television screen that's also a robot process thing called the proxy.
Mm-hmm.
And so he begins monologuing at you for a long time. And it's at that point, too, when you discover what is like the final epoch of the process, which is an entity known as man.
Hmm.
And these man characters launch these things called haircuts, which then chase you down to explode. And there's like various versions of them that will like mask themselves, and so they just are the most powerful, you know, entity here. And while you're hearing this monologuing and walking through this MC Escher area, I think you are led to believe, and again, this is speculation because that's the best we can do, but I think you're led to believe that this is the end goal of the process and what Royce Brackett is trying to do. He is trying to basically remake the world, including the people. Like
Huh.
the process is replacing the people. You see this with the young ladies earlier in the game. Like, wait, why did they take that appearance? It looks like a woman.
Right.
And then you see this with man later. These look like, you know, men or people, and they are like the final, the you know, the final creation of the thing, you know,
Huh.
the evolutionary peak.
Hmm. Um, One of the things that I noticed as you're walking through that whole area is you're walking through an area that the process created, right? Because
Yeah.
Royce doesn't have power at this moment. You're
Right.
holding the transistor, and there are some moments that are really odd to me in the sense that you're walking by like stained glass windows. And so it looks like the process is formulating a religion. And it, you can make some
Yeah.
speculation around what in the world that means, but it almost seems like it's formulating a religion around you. I think that some of the stained glass windows look like red. And so there's this sense of like this computer is making up a church based on this powerful being. And it was just really weird. So, not as weird as replacing people, but it
Yeah.
feels like on that level where it's like this is not the space a machine should be in, and these are the conversations we had around the game Soma. It's like where are the lines, where are we
Oh
comfortable
yeah.
with something being machine and artificial versus where does it need to be flesh and blood and have a soul,
Yeah. And that's exactly what the WoW is doing in Soma.
Yep.
Getting approximating ever closer, maybe the human experience, but it's a an evolution by degrees, and it's really degrading and dehumanizing, and also like horrifying to think of those intermediary steps. And this is, I think, the world that Red is dumped in when she survives the battle. Because yes, thanks Jared for listening. We're excited to be talking about this game. Let us know if you've got any questions about it.
I
The
knew that I didn't have a cousin named Jared, so I needed to throw that up there.
Oh yeah, we this world is empty, but except for the process, right? And the
Mm.
process makes life or makes architecture, or maybe there isn't a difference. Maybe
Ooh.
the process, maybe she could use the transistor to create new people, right? Is
Mm.
kind of the underlying question. But you mentioned something really interesting. I'm wondering why you mentioned it. In the end, she makes the statues, and those made an impression on you.
Yeah. I It's fascinating that she's an artist,
Hmm.
right? And so her first instinct when she is demonstrating this newfound ability is to create something beautiful. It's not just useful. And that's one of the fascinating things about architecture to me as a study is the baseline I would say is it has to be functional when you're building shelter, I guess. But then especially when you're looking at houses, my wife and I are at the beginning of looking at houses. You can see the difference between functional and beautiful pretty
Hmm.
quickly. Um, and so yeah, that space that she created resembled some things that you've walked through, but was unique to her and had representations of people. And so I don't know
Yeah.
that I recognized, like, oh, that's the guy, that has been talking or anything like that. It was just kind of a beautiful work of art, is how I took it. And that was one of the steps that kind of made the ending hit me differently because
Hmm.
there is this hope for Cloudbank. Right now, she's in control. Now she's creating, and wow, with the flick of her wrist, she's creating this beautiful space. Cool, But then she gives that all up, And so it's kind of part of the 1-2 punch, I think.
So so there are statues in that plaza in the beginning of the game, and they're of a man and a woman that resemble Red and the man,
Ooh,
and they are holding hands, or they're together.
huh,
They're touching fingers. When she remakes the plaza, they are apart.
huh,
They are reaching across and cannot touch each other.
huh.
And like the statues that she can create are lonely.
Yeah.
And it's this amazing, subtle thing that I think sets up that end, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what she makes at this point. Like it's an empty world.
Yep.
Even though she has the power, presumably, to create a people, a process people. It sounds awful, right? And unappealing, but at the same time, it is what our antagonist wanted. And
Yes.
somehow was very close to getting. He wanted to survive so he could remake the world with the process people and be a god over it, I guess. But it would be, beautiful in its, ever, unchangingness. Anyway, when you survive, you've got no voice still, and all that's left to you is basically the mantle that Royce was going to wear,
Yeah.
and
And
you
and
were going to
that's
be the new architect.
right. And architect is a really cool word when you think about the role that she'd be playing, because it's obviously not only creating all of the buildings and spaces and statues and everything, but there is a sense that she's fundamentally playing God at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's like it's her will. There's no one else. She might be able to create life with the transistor, um, and, that is a really powerful question. Like, okay, given all the power in the world, but you have to be by yourself, do you want that?
Yeah.
And she doesn't. Um, so before we dive into the country, I wanted to just say something and then ask you your opinion. Which of the characters, the Mr. Nobody or Red, did you identify with the most?
Mm,
Because I feel like I went back and forth without even realizing it, because in a very real sense, you're controlling Red. So I think Red is the out and out primary protagonist of the game.
yeah.
And I also felt like I was helping her, right? Because she's making some of her own choices. The end being the ultimate example of that. We did not press any buttons, or really the end kind of reveals itself when she impales herself. We
Right.
don't choose that as the player. And so in that moment, it's a great example of when I felt much more connected to the transistor itself and Mr. Nobody and his voice, because it's like, wait, whoa, what are you doing? Whoa, don't do this. So it was interesting feeling like I had an active role in the game, but then also like I was really trying to assist her in her role. And so I felt
Mm-hmm.
like I was connecting with both of those main characters. Yeah, not really one or the other. And I was just kind of curious if you had a similar experience or if you had a different reflection on that.
Mm, mm. I think I'm most connected with Red, um, because her motivations, in contrast to what the transistor is telling her, or the voice of the man in the transistor, um, he's telling her to run, and she's going back to face them, right? She wants answers. She wants vengeance. She wants, fill in the blank, right? She wants her voice back. I mean, this is basically the speculation of the man through the entire, narration of the game. As you're fighting with him, he's thinking about what is going through your mind,
Mm,
and she's unable to express it. And all you get is her forward march, toward the villains, and then eventually um, toward the restitution that comes in her, her uh, uploading herself to the transistor, or whatever that
yeah,
it means.
yeah.
And I do find her very fascinating as like a
Mm,
vessel for this motivation. I mean, you're asked to put a lot of thought into why she's doing what she's doing, and in the end, I think the answer is she wants to be reunited with him, and so she goes after the people who took him away from her, looking for a way to bring him back.
right.
And if the whole thought is putting the transistor back in the cradle gives the ability for her to bring him back to life, then we've won. And it's the very last thing that you do in the game is try to bring him back to life, and it fails.
Hmm.
And at that point, she's left with her final option. She's
Hmm.
mastered the power of the transistor and it hasn't worked.
Yeah.
So the entire game is like the exploration of the one choice that she can make other than, dying too.
Hmm. And then just to piggyback off of one thing you were saying about going after the people that are responsible for this, and maybe they have an answer, maybe they have a way to bring him back. It was so fascinating to me that they chose to undercut the normal video game progression of, okay, we're constantly seeing four faces in this group. We're going to fight four bosses, two of them are always talked about together. Maybe we'll fight two of them at the same time. You're just kind of prepping for the video game experience, and you get there. Um, Two of them are already dead. So half
They're
of this
done.
group you never face. And they seem to be the two that would really have a sense of what in the world is going on and how to fix it. They seem to be sort of the brains of the operation, not necessarily the leader of the operation, but they, have the diagrams, and you mentioned having the process in the test tube.
Yeah.
So it was such a fascinating kind of took my breath away for a moment of like, oh, this is not what a video game does, right? This isn't the third level. It was just
Right.
a really interesting, very deliberate storytelling decision.
Yeah.
um and
It
I
is
just was really impressed with it.
it is sidebar as something that indie games do sometimes because
uh
they run out of time.
we had four characters, but we only had two boss battles, so
We did. I mean, like we didn't have time to flesh out any more levels, so we killed off
uh,
two of them at once.
funny. You don't even have to do it for us. You're welcome. No,
That's
so
right.
that's a really funny take that I was anticipating. It was like always from the beginning. This was the plan,
It
and it may or may
fits.
not have been. But
It fits story wise, and of
yeah,
course, the boss in that area is actually the spine, and they've got some weird runaround that you do, on your way after the spine, to get up to the top. I mean, so much of this game, it makes me shake my head. It's like, why did they spend as much time doing this instead of that? And I think that's probably what their creative team, would say today in a retrospective, like, well, again, they were just trying to figure it out. And they let their they let their songwriters write songs, and one of the songs, which is on their like best of hits that they released last year, was cut for the game.
wow,
Like it didn't even make it in the final cut of the game. And I just think it's because it didn't have a place anymore when they finally got done with the content and they like honed in on what their core story was.
right. But you mentioned the runaround. Yeah, it felt like a Scooby Dooby or a Scooby Doo scene
Yeah.
when they're like running in and out of different doors. It's like just take the one elevator.
There's
Like
those
I
little
don't know.
flip pads.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is funny.
Well,
Um,
yeah. So the country.
the
We
country.
got to unpack this.
And I feel like I'm gonna ask a lot from you on this one, but it's just um you mentioned in the last podcast that there were lyrics to the song that we went through that
Hmm.
reference the country, and that it seems to have a dual role. It seems to be an afterlife of sorts, and it also seems to be an actual location outside the city.
Right.
So in some senses, um, you can say, I'll see in the country, like, hey, let's go on vacation. Um, and in some senses, it's almost like I'll see you in hell. But not as an
Yeah.
insult. It
Well,
seems to be um, a,
it's like,
a
um,
tender.
yeah, he bought the farm. You know,
Right.
that's the military
Kick the
jargon
bucket.
version.
Yeah.
Yeah, he bought the farm. It's but in a a very literal sense, like you go to a country when you die, you get totally unplugged from what the city is. And so in that sense, I think the dual meaning really works because Cloudbank is the pinnacle of technology. it's where everything's interconnected and your voice is interconnected with everyone else's voices, and it's as close as you can get to other people through that mediated technology, such that even like people's physical forms seem, I'm trying to think. Um, I mean, we don't really witness any transformations. We witness a lot of special effects. We witness what the process can do to the, to the architecture of places.
Right.
People
But
aren't
then,
actually transhuman in any sense of the word, are they?
well, so when you're playing through for the first time, because that's been only my experience,
Uh-huh.
you come across bodies that
Yeah.
have those like floating blue cubes above them.
Yeah, they're like
Um,
halfway processed.
yeah. And so then you can incorporate that person into the transistor that gives you information about them, and it also gives you a new ability to play with in turn.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like their soul uh is a programmable entity or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
They talk about taking attributes, or what do they call them? Characteristics or
I think it was attributes.
selections.
Ooh.
Selections.
Um,
Yep.
and it's interesting because there seems to be almost two levels. Like
Hmm.
red is in the transistor. Your base strike ability is red's ability. One of the camerata is in the transistor. At least he was for me before he dies. So
Hmm.
there's a time and a place for putting someone in the transistor without taking their life, and then there's a lot of that too.
Hmm.
Mr. Nobody being the prime example of that.
And did you
Um,
notice when you were inside the transistor battling Royce, there's all of
all the
those
pods.
pods? Yeah. Those are like all of the souls you've collected, all
Right.
20 of them.
So like why, to what end? So I would assume red is one of those souls, right? In addition to the one you're playing, because
Yeah.
again the transistor has that ability, which again makes it feel more like these are computer programs to me,
Yeah.
going back to Soma's copy paste instead of
Hmm.
just drag and drop.
Hmm.
um, but then some people are dragged and dropped there. So this is a total side comment, but I want to make an overarching like fan theory for all the games we play and how they're all connected. So the beginning of this theory is that Cloudbank is the city that we see at the end of Soma, right in the arc. So that
It's the
that
arc. It's
is
what happened to the
Cloudbank,
arc.
right? And then we've got the process. Um, and when red leaves that unattended, it continues to develop into the pattern. And then that goes into everybody's gone to the rapture. So it's just a working theory, but I'm going to keep figuring out how all the games we play are in a shared universe with a consistent through line story.
There you
So,
go. There you
anyways,
go. The Pixar theme.
exactly.
Pixar.
Exactly. um,
Oh
so
gosh.
going back to the country, um, it seems to be a real place, right? Where
Yeah, because
it
they talk about it that way. Like the news broadcasts say, well, so and so retired and they thought he went to the country, but it turns out he was killed by the Camerata. But then
right,
it it turns out that that's actually the same thing in the end.
yeah,
There's a real ambiguity in that, because the Camerata people even say to Red, see you in the country when
yes,
they're dead, and she writes back, see you in the country.
and that is in contrast to, because he's saying we could have lived together forever in the transistor, but he wasn't seeing straight, and so yeah, the
Is
country's
that what he
something.
says? Oh,
Yeah,
God.
like there's something
Yeah,
about the country being separate from the transistor.
right.
So there's like at least three states of being in this game.
Yeah.
Um,
And the transistor has a country inside of it, clearly, but it's one where the transistor forms this like obelisk type shape in the background of the scene. Very reminiscent of skyscrapers, domineering over, that country scene. And the country scene seems almost, like a, pastiche, it's not real, it looks very dwarfed by, the transistors in the background.
Right. So maybe that's the process's take on the country, almost like
Yeah,
we see
almost.
the process's take on a religion, as you're walking by those stained glass windows and stuff like that. Yeah.
So, okay.
So here's the one thing I want to say about transitioning into the country.
Mm-hmm.
It seems that the consciousness of Mr. Nobody continues consistently from the sword experience to where Red goes in the country. Again, with Soma, we played with different consciousnesses and like different timelines and kind of turning off and turning on and all of that. But he seems to greet her knowingly when she arrives. And they both seem to be independent of each other. So I don't get the sense that this is just Red being in her version of heaven and he's there because she would love that. But it really does seem like they are two individuals sharing a space that is, consistent for both of them. And he's also been existing in the Transistor at the same time. So, it's just like it's this both and that has so much tension in it, but then is really cool and beautiful, but then doesn't sync up with how I imagine the world works, but yeah, so if the country is okay, so I'm just going to rebuild that sentence. The country seems to be a pretty beautiful fundamental experience of Earth and humanity. Earth being wherever they are. It doesn't need to be the planet Earth. It reminds me of WALL-E in the sense of like, hey, let's get away from screens, let's get away from technology, let's just go plant things and reap them when it's harvest time. And
Define dancing. Yep.
yes. So it feels like a very good grounded place.
Right.
And
so
that
that was Cloudbank's problem, right?
Right.
It was ungrounded and the decisions seemed meaningless to the characters, so they invented even more ungrounded solutions to them, and this got them into all this trouble. But like the whole thought of going backwards to a less technological time was unthinkable.
Right. And so it reminds me of a CEO I met recently that chose to become a farmer. Wildly wealthy guy, invests in tons of companies, and is super sharp. But in his personal life, he's a farmer, and there's something so grounded and simple and kind of true about that experience. You get what you put into it. And so to see them together, not in the spotlight and on stage and surrounded by fans and going to all these fancy restaurants, but just together in an open field, greeting each other after going through this game, that felt like exactly what they needed,
Right.
to just be together minus everything else.
It's glamorous, right? Like the game's art style is just working for it in that finale. As you're panning upward, the stars are there, and now you're seeing all these little vignettes from their life together, and it culminates, and she's wearing her gorgeous dress. It's untorn.
Right.
And he's wearing his cool jacket. They're billowing in the breeze, and there's the farmhouse and the flowing wheat. I mean, it's romantic and it's gorgeous, and you're like, yes, it like speaks to that part of you that's like wishes conclusions could always look so good.
Right.
And really so romantic. It's incredibly romantic, but it's also like very myopic.
Mm.
It doesn't explain what happened to all of those other people.
Yeah. And I think because of what I was saying about it being a shared space that they're both in individually separate from each other,
Yeah,
I would assume that when you pan around, more people are in the country. Like the countryside would be populated.
we hope. And I think in the end, this game is inviting you to hope for the best.
Right.
I mean, it doesn't give you a lot more to work on. So it's like, what does this invoke in you?
Right.
And yeah, for me, I'm like, I kind of really get connected when I think that when she impales herself with the transistor, she's not living on in the transistor. She's dying like he
Hmm.
died. And
Hmm.
when she can't bring him back to life, that's something meaningful.
Hmm.
She's unable to like be where he is. And impaling herself the way he was impaled seems like it would upload her to the transistor. And we did see a country scene in the transistor, but that was one dominated by the red eyes of the
Right.
transistor, and everyone was in little boxes apart. And that didn't seem like heaven at all, right?
Right.
They're free of all of that influence in that final scene. And so, what I really think is that they actually go to an afterlife,
Hmm.
and it's not one that the transistor holds or has programmed or has created or anything.
Yeah.
It's really just a separate place.
So I guess using Soma as my base for this question, do you think then a version of her is also living in the transistor, like he was living in the transistor?
So I this is probably the biggest question of them all, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to say that my hope says that what was in the transistor was not him.
Okay.
So that's
It's a
and it's
programmed
saying a lot.
AI version of him.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was like some kind of reduction of him. And now, does the game lead us to think that is really the question? Is there evidence for this?
Mm,
She doesn't listen to him. That's
right.
important. He's constantly telling her to do things other than what she's doing, and he's constantly speculating but never knowing her. And I am kind of left thinking that she feels lonely because he is not him.
Huh.
you know
Not
there may
truly.
be some of that, yeah, going on at the end. It's
Yeah.
more than just she can't remake his body, but that his even when he says to her, no, 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 don't do that, don't do that. um why is he even saying that, right?
Mm,
I mean, like, everyone's dead.
right.
Does he really connect with her plight?
Right. um
Yeah.
and then it's hard to know when we were near the spine, his voice was kind of slowing down. And so
Hmm.
it's hard to know, is that the machine of the transistor kind of breaking down as a conduit, or is that, a program kind of with magnets near it, and he
Yeah.
isn't really him, and it's yeah. Um I guess the last thing I want to ask you about, and then maybe we can go to the lyrics of the
Right.
song, is when she plunges the transistor into herself, she does something that I don't think is demonstrated in any other part of the game,
Mm.
um, which is just kind of levitating the sword,
Mm, yeah, yeah.
right? Is that? And I was just that just kind of caught me off guard, um, because I don't think that's, yeah, like I said, that's not demonstrated in any other part. Is that? Do you think just kind of further underlying her mastery of the world at this point, or was that something that I missed, in like, no, she could always do things like that.
There's that little flourish button,
Right.
and that's always had like a weightless feel to it. For
Mm-hmm.
for a game that in the trailer she was bouncing around like a gazelle,
Right.
I bet that the flourish was invented at that time. It's like even more bouncy. Otherwise, she's just dragging the dang thing behind her, the whole time and is weighted by
Sparking on the
it.
ground, yeah.
Right. And so those two experiences seem a bit at odds. But yeah, I think you're right that it demonstrates her mastery over the thing, and really how the physical laws don't really mean a whole lot to her anymore.
Okay.
And despite all of that, she's ready to end it.
Right. And if this is a programmable space, why
Hmm.
wouldn't she be able to do that if she's like the architect, the all powerful thing in
She's
it?
Neo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um okay, so I'm going to pull up the lyrics for this song, and I haven't even read these. So
Oh yeah.
I'm excited to go through this with you.
So I'll point out a couple things as I'll read it and point out a couple things as we go. So yeah, the first verse: seconds march into the past, the moments pass, and just like that, they're gone. The river always finds the sea so helplessly, like you find me. We are paper boats floating on a stream, and it would seem we'll never be apart.
Hmm.
I will always find you, like it's written in the stars. You can run, but you can't hide. Try.
Hmm.
So this is playing during the credits, and
Okay.
it's very, poetic. There's a really interesting thing about this. When I think of paper boats, I think of Dear Esther, right, which we streamed at an earlier week, and they all sink, right? They're
Hmm.
really bad boat.
Right. Well, and when I see that, I think of the movie It. And, like totally not related to this, but also a negative experience of paper boats.
Yeah, they're like they don't last very long,
Yeah.
and they're gonna sink. And so you get this verse that sounds like the fleetingness of life. You get this idea: the river always finds the sea so helplessly,
Right.
like it can't help it, but
Like
also
these
negatively.
right. Like these paper boats can't help it. There's no rudder, there's no sail, there's no engine. These paper boats are helpless.
Yeah, they just go where they will go. But then there's this turn in this last line: we'll never be apart. And it would seem like we're going to sink, or it would seem, fill in the blank, right? It's a negative thing. But she's turned this into a positive, that despite the ephemeral nature of life, um, we're going to be together,
Hmm.
um, because the course and even just the physical laws that govern things, will bring us together.
Hmm.
And you see this again in the next verse: like the moon that makes the tides, that silent guide, it's calling from inside. And pull me here and push me there. It's everywhere, hanging in the air. We are magnets pulling from different poles with no control. We'll never be apart.
Hmm.
And there you see it again, this idea that they're under this cosmic influence, and that would seem like it's going to end up in a tragedy. But here it's saying that no, we're magnets and we're going to stick together, and there's no force that's going to be more powerful than it.
Hmm.
It's a cool song that like takes the the brevity of life and turns it on its head
Hmm.
by looking at how the physical forces of the world, tend to resolve together.
Huh. And if this is playing during the credits, we are hearing it, seeing it just prove true moments ago.
Yeah, or we're seeing that they died together. This song is playing, and then we hear the bridge and the chorus as we see the two of them in the country, yeah, brought
Yeah.
together. And it's like the game, the visuals of the game and the song resolve together, and bring you that satisfaction of, oh wow, she's right.
Huh.
And this presumably was one of the songs she would have sung in her career, right?
Right. Right. Because then it would have been played yeah, in those flashbacks where you're getting those still images of her having just walked off stage, writing in the morning while he's bringing her coffee and things like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should look up the Songs of Supergiant version of this
Okay.
song. They redid 10 of their songs. They remixed them orchestrally. And this song, at the chorus or at the bridge, they have this almost like flagrantly happy kind of string melody that they play. It
Huh.
sounds like they ripped it out of a Disney soundtrack.
Ooh.
I know. I'm speaking your language now.
I'm listening. I'm listening.
It's just so like it's so bright. That's
Mm,
like, wow, can they even do that? Yeah. And
wow.
they're really trying to show that contrast, I think, between some of the almost like meditative, melancholy, almost fatalistic, nature of these verses that tend to be a little minor, and then all of a sudden you get this breakout into something, happy, and it's
Wow.
joyful. Yeah, it's really
Um,
an
and
experience.
and then, for my benefit, and then for anyone that will listen, what is the song that got cut that you can look up?
That song's called She Shines.
She shines.
Hmm. So that I don't recall hearing the lyric version in the game. They maybe pulled some motifs in the soundtrack, but I don't know.
Okay.
But they did a separate single with the song. It's got Transistor's branding on it, but it wasn't in the final game
Got it.
or on the final soundtrack for the game. But they did pull it into their kind of greatest hits, songs of Supergiant, and it's a great song. You can get that sense of the Transistor, the man in the Transistor looking up and seeing her as
Huh.
as you know his world. She shines almost like the stars or the sky itself.
Huh.
Yeah,
Interesting. I will absolutely look that up, and I want to hear the reorchestration of Paper Boats. So I'm going to do that. Then
yeah.
I just need to make a playlist of all the great music we listen to when we play these games because
Hmm.
I still go back to the Outer Wilds soundtrack.
Hmm.
I love that soundtrack. And I love that this, unlike the Outer Wilds soundtrack, has lyrics. So yeah, I'm gonna be listening to these a little bit.
Well, I'm glad we talked about the songs because I've read a lot of analysis on Transistor, but none of them really address the songs. I'm like,
Right.
guys,
And like I said, this is some of the only content we're given.
I
This
know,
is some
right?
of the only like this is actually what this is for now. And it seems to be like you were saying, if this is something that's in Red's voice,
Yeah.
this is why she was chosen to be incorporated into the transistor. So it would behoove us to understand more about who she is, how she saw the world, and why the Camerata wanted her to be a part of their program. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm left, kind of in thinking of takeaways, right, from this game.
Yeah.
I mean, I really respect Supergiant as, a software developer and the stories that they're telling. I think they're really at the cutting edge of games these days. And I really respect the work that they did with Transistor in letting each of their departments just go.
Mm.
So, in takeaway, I mean, there's really an exhortation for us to do the same in our own lives,
Huh.
to be willing to let others be all of who they are and be willing to let us be all of who we are, the in all the different facets that involves. I'm glad that we're doing this podcast for that reason, even though we have millions of viewers and not tens of millions. That's I mean, it's awesome that we stick with it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love it. One of the reflections I was listening to about the game was saying that all the characters are all self-actualized.
Mm,
They are all doing exactly what they want to be doing when you read their profiles in the
yeah.
transistor. And so, yeah, that does seem like a cool call. And then there needs to be relationship and connection, and that kind of feels like some of the lesson to be learned. Like, you can't just do this on your own, and it can't just be perfect and all of that. As some of a takeaway for me, I was trying to figure out what I would be if I was put into the transistor. And so my program, as I kind of thought about it, would be called How. And so in the active, as a function, I would be, it would cost some of the turn to create the most effective attack. So you lose some of your power by using the rest of it to be the most powerful attack you can have. And that kind of stems from some of the things I see in myself about operations and strategy and systematizing things. I really, and like playing board games and stuff, and then like I run operations, when I'm when I'm doing my job. So that would be kind of how I see how in the active. In the I'm forgetting the terms right now, but in the passive, when they're on like the sides,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking of that as being kind of like an encouraging how. Like, how cool was that? And so you'd like recover, you'd recover your turn energy a little bit faster to run the how, in the passive. And then when it's in the subordinate, it would be more like a counselor. Like, how are you? How
Nice.
was that experience? How are you doing after that? And I think that would just I think I was kind of going back and forth between it would cost less because you're kind of getting some soul care. Yeah, but there was a function that did that. So, but yeah, those were kind of the three uses of how that kind of symbolize me to a certain extent. But
Nice.
so yeah, I recently I was listening to a podcast on leadership with Brene Brown, and she was talking to Simon Sinek in this one, and they made an offhand comment that stuck with me. It wasn't even the point of the podcast, but it was just we should all keep working toward our obituary, and that's ultimately our legacy. And that's something I've thought of before. I think
It's a
in your
very
group
transistor comment.
right? Um, I think in a time like this, when we are still dealing with the pandemic, we're almost a year later, and still
Mm-hmm.
very much a thing. When we are all, waiting for one thing or another in our lives, I think it was important for me to remember that I can still keep working toward my obituary. It's not any one situation that I find myself in or don't find myself in that will, really be my legacy and how I uh, make a lasting mark. But, I can still keep working toward who I want to be and what I want to do, in any situation. So,
Mm,
yeah.
mm. Yeah. I'm looking at this little thumbnail of the gal holding the transistor, right? And she's like cradling it, you
Mm,
know, and they call that dock for the transistor the cradle
right.
later in the game. And what's really interesting is that she's asked by Royce to basically surrender the transistor, who has her love in it. And in that sense, that may be the beginning of the end, is when she gives up the man,
Mm,
by letting the transistor be just the transistor, like the
right.
technological tool that it is.
Right.
And then when she's given it back at the end, it has lost its essential, almost like life-giving, meaning there.
Mm,
And that's just really interesting. I mean, a lot of this game is about, remembering to disconnect from
mm,
technology and know that, like, what makes us whole and what makes us connect to each other is not based in the devices that we're using and the cool ways in which we can, interact through them. And so, yeah, that's just another takeaway I'm seeing here,
Huh.
in the midst of all this. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that, with conversations like this, we're going to continue having great conversations about whatever game we're playing. But then, I brought up Soma in this. I brought up Outer Wilds.
Hmm.
There was another. Oh, I brought up Everybody's
Rapture.
Gone to the
Yep.
Rapture. And so I think that we're going to continue to talk about this game, as time goes on and all of that. So, again,
Yeah.
thanks for selecting these, Rye.
It was a really cool flavor,
Yeah.
and it's stuck with me ever since I played it, even though
Mm,
I can say at the same time, like, yeah, the blend of the flavors didn't quite, cohere in the end.
huh.
Is it still worth playing for
Yeah.
a game that's relatively cheap and like 5 hours long? It's a steal. Like, this is the kind of thing you should be playing games for, because you
Right.
get like this really hyper dense experience in such a short period of time. It gets you to think and puzzle and have fun and do new things. I mean, that's the wonderful world of games.
And I would be remiss without just saying again, we kind of hammered it into the ground last time, but haven't brought it up much. The art in this game is so beautiful. The animation and everything is really fun and lively and wonderful and vibrant. But then whenever it cuts to a still shot, those are just breathtaking. They're like these oil painting feeling like works of art. So yeah, if
I
for
know.
nothing other than the music and the visuals, but then the gameplay and the story are absolutely worth
There's
diving
like
into as well.
a fashion sense to these games that makes
Yeah.
me feel so unqualified to talk
I need to dress better
about.
when
I
I'm
know,
playing
like,
this.
wearing my sweats.
I need to do my hair again.
We're really underdressed compared to her.
Yeah. And then even when she rips her dress in half, it still looks awesome.
I
So,
know.
mm. But hey, Rye, what is the next game we're gonna dive into
Oh
in
man,
March?
dive into very great segue there, Justin. Yeah, we are diving into Subnautica. In this underwater adventure game, you are exploring an alien ocean with not but your diving suit, and and it is one of the best realized open world games that I've ever played, and it is very open world. I mean, they basically open you up and you can go in 360 degrees in any direction in the ocean, and you have no inclination of where to begin. And so you have to dive in and just start doing stuff, and eventually you learn things like how to collect resources, how to extend the capacity of your oxygen tank, how to build little submersible vehicles to get around, how to dive to depths and explore underwater caves and discover all manner of scary creatures that dwell in the depths. It is a game with secrets behind secrets behind secrets. And unlike Outer Wilds, which is a very tightly focused game in the end around that core mystery of the time loop, this game just lets you wander. The leash is very long. And
Huh.
so a lot of players have never finished this game and have just delighted in making underwater bases and, just randomly diving in and doing a little bit, and then they feel satisfied by that. They don't have to finish. I don't anticipate we will finish in the
Okay.
time that we have in a month. It's a long game. It's very much longer than Transistor or any game we've played recently. I think the game all told will take someone around 30 hours to finish if
Okay.
they play through the main story. Um, and honestly, they will probably be benefited by referencing a wiki now and then to get a handle around a piece that they don't quite understand, or a crafting recipe or stuff like that.
Great. Or like where to find titanium.
Hopefully, they don't have any trouble finding titanium.
No. You're right. Not titanium. Shoot. What am I looking for now? It doesn't matter. Yeah, the
Yeah.
the titanium's easy. It's the wreckage. The I've got tons of the tighter version of titanium now, where it's like,
The,
hey, want to put
the
10 titaniums together? I do, because I
I
have
really
nowhere to
do.
put it. So no, yeah, no, titanium is not my problem right now.
We may want to just hop on. Maybe Jimmy and I'll hop on next week and just talk about a little getting
Yes,
started guide to this thing, because
and
it's
play a
really
start getting
helpful.
started guide.
Yeah, it's really helpful to know a few things out the gate, like, because it can be very frustrating just running out of inventory space.
Yeah. Um, and I thought I found a hack for that, where it's like, I'm gonna make food and then drop it right outside my pod, and that works, but the food rots. So
It
it's like,
goes real bad.
it's, yeah, real, and also fast. So I found this pile of food that was not worth eating.
Oh gosh, that's so funny.
But cool. Subnautica, March
Yep.
2021, sommelier selection.
Mm,
To be experienced, maybe not completed. So
yeah.
that'll be cool.
And if
Um,
if it's your kind of game, you will just go with this game, and you will be so glad you played it. Again, it's another game from like 5 years ago, so they've made little quality of life updates since then, and they've actually got a sequel coming out that we almost played, but it's not at one yet. It's not at 1.0. So
um,
yeah.
and just one. I've only played this game for probably about 2 hours now.
Hmm.
And it's a gorgeous game. My goodness. It's really fun just swimming around, and it's incredible how the world changes between day and night.
Yeah.
That has been really fun. And then I started going a little bit deeper and and got scared. So I
Turned around.
we'll continue this conversation later when hopefully I have more than my little knife, because that was not doing as much for me as I wanted it to. But
No.
no, I won't. Oh shoot.
No.
Okay, more air then. I just need to get that second oxygen
Yep.
tank, and then I'll have a little more time. But yeah. But hey, great talking to you, Rye.
Yeah.
If you are watching this on Twitch or FaceTime or YouTube, you can find us on the other ones, but our hub is kind of Facebook. So you can find us on Facebook, and that's kind of where we're posting things. But hey, we will see you next month, and we will be playing Subnautica, and that just seems like a good visual to take us out on. All right, and we'll be with Jimmy. Okay, bye.